So we'll start with a few introductions. My name is Sylvester Cruz. I'm the Grants and Partnerships Coordinator here at NJCH. I administer the grants program under the supervision of my colleague Gigi Naglek, our Director of Programs, who's also here with us. I'm sure if you guys have had dealings with the council before, you've probably run into Gigi in one way or another. She brings a lot of a real wealth of experience to her oversight of all our program offerings, including the grants program. NJCH, well, the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, NJCH for slightly shorter than that, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, as well as a state partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We're not affiliated with the state or federal government. We're not a government agency. We're an independent nonprofit organization that regrants federal funds for the purposes of public humanities projects in the great state of New Jersey. Because our grants are regrants of federal funds from NEH, the National Endowment for the Humanities, our grants are subject to restrictions that the federal government places on those funds. We'll talk a little bit about some of those in the content of today's presentation. We do try to eliminate as many barriers as possible for applicants to our grants program, but there are some that we can't eliminate, and ask for your understanding there. And for today's agenda, there are a few points that we really wanted to hit with this, a few salient points. And just before we get into it, I want to be very clear that everything we discuss today is not new information, and it's not being kept secret, only accessible in this webinar. Everything we discuss today is written down in the grant guidelines, which are publicly available on our website at any time. This information is also it's available on the web pages themselves, but it's also available as a downloadable PDF file, which is really readily accessible on our website. So if you guys have to run, halfway through this meeting, don't worry about it. You're not going to miss anything that isn't always available on our website or through other means. Today we're going to talk a little bit about who can apply for grant funding from us, what kinds of organizations are eligible. We're going to talk a little bit about what sort of things we fund, as well as the kinds of things that we can't fund, even though we'd really like to. We're going to talk about our major grant funding streams. We only have two in operation currently, and those are our Action Grant and Incubation Grant funding streams. We'll talk a little bit about that distinction between Action and Incubation and how that matters for you. We'll talk about what you'll need to get started with an application to NJCH for some grant funding. And we'll go over a couple important notes regarding dates and deadlines, as well as some additional resources that are going to be available to you. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. On the topic of who can apply, organizations, we only offer grant funding to organizations. We don't offer grant funds to individuals for any reason. Your organization must be a nonprofit or a government agency. That's kind of the first benchmark. And your organization must also be New Jersey based. You're allowed to have offices in other states. What you guys do in your interstate portfolio is, that's beyond our purview. But your organization needs to have meaningful, demonstrable connection to the state of New Jersey, this great state that we do all of our work in. A unique entity identifier, this sort of like registration number that you acquire through an application process from sam.gov, government website, is required in order to seek grant funding from us. But full sam.gov registration is actually not required. You can start an application with us if you currently don't have a verifiable UEI number attached to your organization. But if it falls out that you make it through the application and you're offered an award, we actually won't be able to disperse that award to you unless you have a UEI that is verifiable in the sam.gov registration database, And that UEI also needs to be publicly searchable. So you can't have your organization set to private visibility or, what some other way that they call it that, but it needs to be publicly searchable and accessible. We've been receiving reports from some of our own grantees as well as grantees at other state councils and other states that folks have been, experiencing a few delays with getting their UEI numbers from the federal government. So if you don't currently have one of those, we suggest that you start the application process now, probably sooner rather than later, as this can take a while to process. Another note that I wanted to mention is that our understanding of a government agency or department is kind of broad. This can include entities such as municipal libraries and schools, at the K through 12 level. So, a lot of our existing grantee partners are public libraries, and if you're affiliated with a public library, that organizational categorization would fall under government agency from our perspective. Your organization does not need to be a humanities organization. You don't need to be humanities missioned in order to apply for funding from us. But the work of the project would need to be humanities focused and oriented. That's a distinction we'll get into in just a little bit. One last note about this. For academic institutions, and this is, schools at the K through 12 level or institutions of higher education, whether that be a community college or a four-year degree granting institution like a university. All academic institutions are eligible to pursue funding opportunities with us. But in order to be competitive, academic institutions must show that their projects engage the local community beyond the school. In order for that project to be competitive from the perspective of our strategic funding priorities. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in some of these upcoming slides here. One last note, for returning customers, right? Organizations that have, dealt with the council before, perhaps you've, received grant funding from us in the past. And specifically, if you have an open grant with us now, currently, organizations with open grants with us now currently must have these open grants closed. And that means with final reporting requirements submitted and approved by council staff. These open grants must be closed before you submit a new grant application. Organizations that currently have open grants with us are not eligible to seek additional funding from us through our grant funding streams. So just to kind of underscore that point and make it super clear. And now let's talk a little bit about the kind of stuff that we do fund. So moving away from organizational eligibility and talking more about project eligibility. We fund strictly the planning and implementation of public humanities projects. There are a couple key terms in that I feel like are worth unpacking a little bit. So let's think about what the humanities are for a second. The humanities, as we understand them, can be two things, right? They can be academic subjects that you would typically encounter during the course of, one's education, right? Academic subjects like history, literature, philosophy, ethics, and maybe even less common humanities disciplines like jurisprudence. That's one that we we value and accept the contributions of all jurisprudence scholars to humanities discourse. That stuff is super important. But subjects that typically deal with human cultures, human values, human beliefs, focusing on human stuff. We also think about the humanities as practices, as being sets of practices as well associated with those subjects of academic study. Some humanities practices that you guys might be familiar with are, for example, oral history. That's a really common one, as well as critical thinking, which is a practice. It's a thing that people do, right? Textual analysis, really broadly conceived, whether that's at the level of the book club or a sort of like, higher order, textual discussion, right? We like to think of humanities practices as facilitating inquiry into tough questions and concepts, as well as dialogue about, issues related to human life, society, values, culture, and beliefs. Um, the public humanities, they tend to make the humanities accessible to broad public audiences. Now, this is at this point we want to underscore that again, we don't fund programs that are aimed primarily at scholarly audiences, right? So, the humanities as subjects, right? They tend to be sort of cloistered within the university to a certain degree. The public humanities take that content out of the classroom and make it accessible to a broader public audience. And another consideration to keep in mind with the public humanities, as we understand them here at NJCH, is that the public humanities prioritize populations that don't have access to humanities programs in that kind of traditional sense, and or do not have a voice in humanities discourse. We refer to these populations as being underserved or underrepresented in the humanities writ large. The public humanities takes humanities subjects and practices, brings those things to populations that otherwise wouldn't have access to. Humanities missioned organizations would be organizations that are specifically geared at like doing a particular humanities thing. Like history is all we do, jurisprudence is all we do, right? Humanities work, by contrast, isn't limited to an organization that has the humanities as part of its core central mission. Right? A library can do humanities work. An art gallery can do humanities work. A theatrical production company can do humanities work, right? Humanities work is what we fund at NJCH, right? That's the kind of work that we want to support with our grant funding. An organization does not need to have a mission in the humanities in order to apply for one of our grants. Our grants support humanities-based projects, whether or not the humanities are at the heart of the mission of the organization. I already listed a few examples, but I'll list a couple more. Arts organizations, social service agencies, neighborhood or community groups, and public libraries, of course, as well as local government entities. All of these organizations are not humanities missioned, but these are all examples of types of organizations that have received funding from us in the past and will continue to do so in the future. The project proposed does need to have the humanities at the core of its work. So projects that have only a tangential humanities component are pretty unlikely to be competitive and may also not be eligible for some of our grant funds. For example, painting a picture of Abraham Lincoln is not a humanities project, even if he is, well-known historical figure. An exhibition about Lincoln's life and how his words, policies, etc., impacted the development of the United States in the 19th century as told by art. Now that's a humanities-centered project, right? Kind of like, again, putting that emphasis less on the production and creation of art and more on the, discussion, inquiry, dialogue, critical thinking that sort of surrounds the reception of the work of art. This kind of naturally leads us to the question of what we don't fund. And this list is slightly longer than the list of stuff that we do fund, so I'll spend a little time on this one. We don't fund humanitarian aid and social services. Even though we'd like to, we can't. And we also don't fund self-help, wellness, health, and fitness programs, even though that stuff is super great and should totally have a platform to be done in this society because people need that stuff. Projects that benefit humanity are not exactly humanities projects, right? That's kind of a core distinction to underscore. The humanities being certain kinds of subjects and practices, whereas stuff that benefits humanity that's a little bit more vague, more vacuous, more all-encompassing, right? We also don't fund grants, scholarships, prizes, or awards. This largely has to do with, because we get our funding from, a federal agency, the National Endowment for the Humanities. We can't re-grant funds for further re-granting. That's not an eligible use of the funding that we receive from the federal government. So we won't be able to fund a project that is at its core either a grant, scholarship, a prize, or an award. We also don't fund direct political and social advocacy. It's another thing that we can't necessarily support in the grants program at this time. And of course, we don't fund projects that do not engage with the humanities, even though they're very worthy and well put together. It's not within the scope of our fund priorities as an organization. A pretty common mistake is that we sort of see in the administration and the grants program from year to year is that applicants sometimes assume that particular types of projects automatically center the humanities. And I'll run through a few examples of these. For example, education is not a humanities discipline. If your project is at core teacher training or the construction of a certain kind of curriculum, that doesn't automatically make it a humanities project. We learn math as part of our education. We learn science as part of our education, right? Education is something that's a bit broader than the humanities as we're thinking about them from an organizational standpoint. Social justice initiatives too. Those might include political advocacy, and they may be about kind of benefiting humanity in a specific kind of way, but they're not always humanities based. Those kinds of initiatives, like some rectangles are squares, but not all squares are rectangles. It's kind of a thing, right? Like there's a lot of humanities projects have like a sort of social justice component or a social justice mindset to them, but that doesn't automatically make them humanities projects as we're kind of conceiving of them here. Some social science work, right? A lot of like sociological stuff is very quantitative, right? It's about capturing numerical data, and not the sort of analysis and critical inquiry that we would sort of level at that data from a humanities perspective. So social science work, not all social science work is eligible for funding from us. And similar to the social justice point, DEAI or IA, however you're using that acronym, does not automatically equal humanities, although the humanities can be very useful in sort of approaching these questions of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. All of the above examples can be approached through humanities-based work, but they're not automatically equal to humanities. There are some gray areas too, where different disciplines might overlap with the humanities. We see this a lot from arts mission organizations when they submit applications to us. But the eligibility and competitiveness of that project is largely going to depend on how much humanistic work is really central to that work of the project. So I'm going to turn to my next slide here. And I'm just going to sort of come up for air just for a second and pose a question to you guys really, really quickly. Kind of keeping in mind this sort of distinction between eligibility and competitiveness that I've talked about, in a couple different ways throughout the last few slides. I wanted to ask, what do you guys think is the number one reason that a grant proposal is not funded by our organization? Do you have any thoughts about that? And you can feel free to unmute yourselves at this point, just to throw a quick answer to this. Okay, we've got one answer in the chat here. The application did not include all of the information asked for. That's from Rachel. Thanks, Rachel. That's one thing for sure. Incomplete application or doesn't meet the eligibility requirements from Nicole. Yeah, not New Jersey based. These are all things that we totally see in coming up in the grants program at various times and in different ways. These are all really great guesses. Thank you so much for contributing these. It's not a humanities project. That's another major reason why applications don't get funded in our grant rounds.
That's probably reason number 2, I would say.
That's reason number 2 for
reason number
sure.
2.
Yeah, yeah, this is great. I'm getting a lot of useful feedback on this one. Not a public facing project. Humanistic work not at the center. Again, that's a really major reason why grant proposals don't get funded from us. So yeah, these are all really, really great contributions to this discussion here. And I definitely want to say that, like there are certain intrinsic reasons why, a grant proposal might not get funded from us. But the number one reason, hands down, from a sort of grant making perspective, our vantage point here at the desk, right? The number one reason a grant proposal doesn't get funded is the competition itself. The fact that we have a limited amount of funds to give out from the federal government. We have the great fortune of being well established in a state that's doing a ton of really fantastic humanities work, at any given point in the calendar year. We want to support everything that comes across our desks for the most part. But the limited availability of that funding and the sort of competition that arises from that is 100% the number one reason that grant proposals don't get funded by us in a particular grant round. We see a lot of like really worthy proposals coming across our desks, and not all of them get funded, and it's unfortunate, but our grants are highly competitive, and we want to underscore that for potential applicants really early on in the process. And this is also why we talk so much about what we fund, what we don't, and how competitive your project will be, is just to underscore that dimension of the process. A few statistics: in the past couple of rounds, we've been able to fund about 30 to 40% of proposed projects, which is pretty good. We receive consistently more applications in a given year than we did in previous years, and we're expecting that trend to continue. In the last round, for reference, we received over 60 applications and funded 19 across both incubation and action grant funding streams. So funding at a rate of about 30% there. And, in this fiscal year, we're going to have about $500,000 total to give out in grant awards. So there's going to be a lot of really good projects that we're going to see in this fiscal year. And a lot of them are probably not going to get funded because of the competitive nature of seeking grants here. Projects that are most well aligned with our funding priorities are going to be the most competitive. And we'll talk a little bit about what that involves in future slides, as well as in future workshops that JCH offers. To talk just a little bit about the funding streams that we have here in the grants program. Again, we kind of break this down into two incubation and action grants. Incubation grants support the development of new programs or the reimagining of old programs, right? So incubation grants are largely about thinking, planning, development. Action grants support the implementation of and or expansion of newer existing projects, right? So incubation grants are kind of about thinking and planning and development. Action grants are about doing. You can't apply for both of these funding opportunities at the same time. You can't submit an application to the incubation grant funding stream as well as the action grant funding stream in a single award cycle. That's a pretty important point. If you can also switch between these two funding streams before the application deadline. So if you submit an application on one, you can swap to the other. If you're unsure about exactly where your project idea really lands, in terms of this distinction between incubation and action, please feel free to get in touch with us, whether via email or by scheduling a one-on-one consultation with us. We're always, happy to do those. Incubation grants, again, are about research, planning, and development. This is at a stage where you still have significant questions about your project, even including whether that project is viable, right? With incubation grants, we like to stress that failure is an option, right? We want to encourage experimentation, productive risk-taking, in terms of the kinds of proposals that you bring to bear here on that funding stream. Whereas action, by contrast, is about implementation, right? You're at a stage where you know what you're doing and you've mostly identified the key components and contributors that are going to go into making that idea work. Action grants would include pilot projects, right? So even if it's something new that you've never tried before, if it's ready to go, it's ready for that implementation stage, then it's still, a viable candidate for an action grant award. Being new doesn't automatically make it an incubation grant. And we're happy to talk about those distinctions with you guys at any time. I want to take a quick break for questions from the audience. So I don't know if you guys want to, we had a lot of great success with the chat earlier, or if you want to unmute yourselves to ask a question, we'll do that for just a minute here. So does anyone have any questions about what we've talked about so far?
I do. I have a question. Working on our report from our last grant round. Do we wait to submit the LOI until after that is approved, or it's the full app, wait for the LOI?
That's definitely the safest bet. You can't have an open grant with us at the time of the award being dispersed, so the final report would need to be into us before then. But definitely with this kind of like overlap area, we'd like the final report sooner rather than later, just so that it
Perfect.
doesn't affect your eligibility there.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, no worries. Thanks for that question, Nicole. It's a really good question.
Sylvester, there's a question in the chat from Michelle. Hi, Michelle. Can funding include paying students to do work, scanning newspapers, oral histories, etc.?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Funding can definitely include paying students to do that work. Depending on the institution that you're associated with, we would want to see evidence, I guess, that all members of the project team were being fairly compensated for the kind of work they were doing. And if students are working for you, then yeah, that would absolutely be an eligible expense from our perspective. Funding can include paying lots of different people, as Gigi's saying in the chat here. Yeah, generally speaking, staff or personnel costs are pretty common requests in terms of the sorts of applications that we receive here at NJCH. That's a pretty common thing that people ask for money for. So, yeah, that would be.
I'd just like to add one really quick thing about students. Student work is absolutely something that can be paid. The only thing that is a restriction, and you can see this in our full guidelines, is we do not support work that is we cannot support work that is for credit. So this would have to be work outside of a student's for credit course or anything like in their classwork. So that is one distinction there. But often exactly the reason why you want to pay students for their work is because it's from outside of class. So that's one small distinction regarding student work.
That's a super great point to clarify. Thank you for that, Gigi. Yeah, that's super helpful to contribute. Any other questions from the audience just before we kind of get back into the swing of things here? Okay. So if we're all good, I'm gonna keep barreling on here. And we'll talk a little bit about what you guys would need to get started with prepping a grant application for us. First things first, we want to encourage you to take advantage of the great resources that we have publicly available on our website. Our grant guidelines are available at the URL that you see here on this slide here, njhumanities.org/grants. That'll take you to our grants overview page. From there, you can navigate to the individual pages for the Incubation and Action Grant funding streams, which contain all the necessary information for that respective grant type. The main difference between those two pages is the eligible project section, again, because an incubation project is at a sort of meaningfully different stage than an action grant project. So we draw your attention to those sections of those pages. Once you've really read through the guidelines and kind of internalized the content there, we'd encourage you to get started in our application portal, which is available at this URL here at njhumanities.org/portal. Logging in through that URL will take you to the login page for our grant administration interface, which is called Foundant. That'll be really familiar to those of you who've received funding from us before or who are doing projects with us currently. You can create a new user account for yourself through on that login page. If you haven't applied for a grant from us before, you would create a new user account as well as an organization profile for the organization with which you're affiliated. And we're happy to walk you through the steps of that at any time if you have any questions about it. But it's a fairly straightforward process. Once you've gotten your account registration set up, all done, once you've located your login credentials and your passwords and things like that, you submit an LOI, which is, for those of you familiar with like grant speaking terminology, an LOI is a letter of intent to submit a full application. This is a short form that you fill out in the grant administration interface. There's just a few fields that we, look at on our end just to screen your organizations for eligibility. The LOI is required, but it's not competitive. Again, like you're not competing for funding at this stage. The LOI is just a sort of bureaucratic formality that we need to go through in order to make sure that your organization is actually eligible to receive funding from us. Once we receive the LOI from you guys, we'll approve that on our end if everything looks good. And then you'll receive an email invitation to the email that you used when you created your user account to submit a full application for the funding opportunity in this round. Does anyone have any questions about that process? Any questions there? Yes, Sally? Yeah, I think I can see your hand.
Hold on, now I'm unmuted. So, because I have the login, we've not applied for a grant before, and so with the LOI, I see something about a grant hub. Is that different from the login?
I think Grant Hub is just like what it refers to itself as in the URL. Yeah, it's kind of the system that processes the applications. But
so sending it to Grant Hub, because it's asked, I see that as an option when I'm in the action grants round. Oh, that is round 2 different than, no, that's round 2. That has to do with the timing. So if I send it to the Grant Hub, it's asking for a Grant Hub site key.
That sounds wrong to me. Does that sound wrong to you, Gigi? Yeah, I don't think that's.
Yeah. So it's a feature within the grant application system that is an option, but it's not something that's required. So we use a system called Foundant. You can apply directly within it. So you shouldn't need this. When you log in, when you create your profile and everything, you'll eventually get to a page that is called Apply, and you can click on the link to Incubation Grant or Action Grant and start an application directly.
Okay.
Within Foundant, they are connected to another grant application system that's called Grant Hub. It's a way of applying to multiple grants at one time.
Okay.
So if you already use Grant Hub, you could use Grant Hub to apply for our grants also.
Okay.
Does that make sense? But if you're following that link, in other words, don't follow that link. And we may need to troubleshoot if that's the only thing that's coming up. It may be some weird glitch.
Okay, after this call and all that, I'll look at this afternoon and get back to you. Thanks so much.
Certainly.
That'd be really great. Thanks for letting us know about that, Sally. I see another question came through in the chat here.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, sorry. Did you want to?
I was going to read it, but go ahead, Sylvester. Go for it.
Oh, for sure. So Chanel is asking, once the LOI is approved, are applications submitted after the 3/31 deadline, or are we able to submit before then if approved sooner? Great question. Also, is there a template for the applications? To your first question, Chanel, once the LOI is approved, you have the option to submit the application immediately. Basically, like once a link to submit a full application is included in the approval email that you receive once your LOI is approved. We actually, and I'll underscore this again in a later slide, we do want to encourage you guys to get those LOIs in sooner rather than later, because it actually gives you more time before the application deadline on April 16th to work on your applications and really touch them up well. Definitely don't wait until the 31st of March to turn in an LOI. That just gives you guys like way less time to work on the application on your end and get that submitted. Do draft review if you want to take that as an option, so we definitely encourage submitting way before the 3/31 deadline, so you can get approved soon. Also, the application itself, the full application is available to download from our website as a resource in case you want to look at it in advance. but the application itself, as it like presents in your user view and Foundant, the system, is just a sort of form that needs filling out. So you just sort of like log in and you just type in your answers there. So the application template, the full version of the application with all the form fields to be filled out, that's available on our website as a resource. And I'd be grateful, Gigi, if you could maybe share a link in the chat to that in case anybody wants to. Felicia, yes, the LOI is submitted through Foundant as well. All of our grant application documents go through that interface. So if there are no further questions from the audience on getting started, I'll probably just keep ticking through the material that we have queued up here, and maybe talk a little bit about some important considerations to keep in mind as you go about applying for one of our grants. Again, underscoring that we offer funding for projects, not for general operations support. We do not have any grant funding streams available for general operating support at this time, even though we'd like to support that kind of stuff. It's just not in our portfolio at this time. Project grants can be really tricky for smaller organizations in particular, and we do, we acknowledge that that can be a little sticky sometimes. Especially if you're asking for funding to do like one of your core programs as a smaller organization, right? Then the line between GOS and project funding gets a little, slippery. We're always happy to talk that through with you, and sort of like help you to make clear in your applications that what you're asking for is funding for a project as opposed to general operating support. But we do want to underscore that we can't actually support general operating costs at this time, strictly from the perspective of the grants program. Our grants do have a 1-1 match requirement, and this you can make that match with any combination of cash and in-kind contributions. That matching requirement basically means that for every dollar you request from NJCH, you need to put up at least one of your own from the organization's perspective. And we ask for this match requirement because we as an organization are required to match the funding that we grant from the federal government in 1-to-1 ratio. So you match because we match. When you match our funds, it helps us to make our match to the federal government. It's kind of how the chips fell on this one. So as far as the project period goes, all projects that are supported by funding from our grants program must begin, and specifically for this upcoming round that opens on March 1st, those projects must begin between July 1st and September 30th of this year. That's when they must start, right, in order to be eligible for funding from our grants program. And you guys will have up to 1 year, 12 months, to spend out the funding that you'd be awarded in this upcoming grant cycle. You can't, unfortunately, you cannot request any funding for expenses incurred prior to or after this grant period. So if you're considering applying for something that's going to happen like, 8 months from now, is really only going to take off like in the first few months of 2025, then we'd probably encourage you to consider applying in our fall round of grant opportunities instead. And if there's any question about like the timing of your projects or like the alignment of your project timeline with the project period of the grant, we're always happy to discuss that in one-on-ones or over email as well. The project team, this is another important consideration, is the list of people who are working on your grant, right? Your grant funded project. You must have a humanities scholar on your project team, and this person can be either internal, affiliated with your organization on your payroll, etc., or they can be external, right? They could be an individual or a representative of an external partner organization that you guys are doing a lot of work with for this project. Our website has a lot of information about how we define humanities scholar. This doesn't necessarily mean like an academic with traditional training and a PhD in a whatever subfield. Humanities scholars for us can also be community leaders, keepers of knowledge for particular communities or groups, and fuller information about how we understand that individual, their qualifications and their role is available again in the guidelines on our website. On the off chance that a grant funding opportunity is perhaps not the best choice for you at this time, we do want to underscore that NJCH offers additional funding streams outside the scope of our grants program and our grant funding opportunities. And there are a few alternatives to grant funding from our organization that I wanted to kind of run through with you guys right now. And the first of those alternatives is a program, a key themed program that we run in-house called Community History. Now, this is a cohort-based learning and project development program that has been developed and overseen by my colleague Gigi for a few years now. It's been going really, really well, and it's focused on giving individuals and organizations without a background in the traditional methods of practicing history. It's a program that's aimed at giving those individuals the tools and experience they need to conduct publicly engaged community historical work in their own regions and in their own communities. Community history is the cohort-based learning aspect of that program, runs for about 4 months. Followed by a project development and piloting of projects period, which lasts about 3 months. It comes with a $1,000 participation award for participation in the cohort-based learning portion of that program. And that's accompanied by up to $5,000 in project funding for the project that is developed within the time span of your organization's participation in that program. Unfortunately, the community history cohort for 2024 has already been selected, and the application is now closed until 2025. But this is definitely something to keep on your radars, as an organization, if publicly engaged history work is something that you guys are interested in doing. So definitely stay posted on NJCH's social media and monthly newsletters for more information about when that program starts accepting applications again. Another program that's really, really similar to community history is called Humanities Lab. This is another opportunity for alternative funding that NJCH offers. And again, a program that's been developed and overseen by my colleague Gigi for about 1 year now. Humanities Lab is again a cohort-based learning program offering that is targeted sort of at organizations who haven't really gotten their feet wet in the public humanities as of yet. It's a structured learning and collaborative space aimed at giving people sort of platform to experiment with doing new and innovative kinds of public humanities projects and work. The cohort-based learning segment of that program again runs for about 4 months. Project development and piloting period sort of following that. There's a $500 participation award attached to Humanities Lab, followed by again up to $5,000 in project funding to support the work of projects that are developed within that program. The Humanities Lab application is going to open on March 1st, the same day as the grant opportunity applications. And the application deadline for Humanities Lab is April 30th. So that's just something to keep in mind there. The Humanities Lab cohort will kick off in June 2024 in case you guys want to mark your calendars for that program. We also offer sponsorships at NJCH, up to $3,000 of unrestricted funding to support, usually single day events or, programs that, sort of strongly center the public humanities and, bring those subjects and practices to audiences that otherwise wouldn't have access to them. We see sponsorships as being kind of a two-way street, unrestricted funding support for you and your event, and marketing and brand visibility for NJCH. So if you do receive a sponsorship from us through our sponsorships program, we would require you to sort of acknowledge that support in various ways. There's details associated with that. If anyone's interested in the sponsorships opportunity, please feel free to send me an email, and I will connect you directly with our staff member who's responsible for overseeing that program. Amy Libery, our special projects manager. She's really, really capable and competent and a wonderful human being. I'm sure you guys will like working with her if things go that way. Oh, and I see Gigi has been dropping some links in the chat here, so that's really, really good to see. One point to underscore is that we can't double fund. We don't encourage or allow double dipping in organizations, across organizations in our network, right? So if you're interested in considering an alternative to grant funding, you would need to fully commit to that funding stream and submit an application in either the incubation or action grant funding streams. You can't apply for a sponsorship at the same time as a grant, that kind of stuff. Right? If anybody has any questions about any of that stuff, we'll happily address that in the Q&A or over email or phone. A few important dates to keep in mind. The LOI period for our grant opportunities opens on March 1st, running to March 31st, at which point we won't accept any new LOIs that are submitted. We do offer draft review, application draft review, NJCH staff. We offer that. We'll sit down with you and we'll go through a rough draft of your application. We'll talk about what we think is working really well and maybe what could be touched up a bit. And it doesn't need to be a full application either. It can just be like a sort of bulleted list, if that's the stage that you're currently at right now, we'll do it. We'll sit down with you for a half hour and just go over that. But if we receive any requests for draft review after April 3rd, we unfortunately won't be able to accommodate those because we'll be prepping to wrap up the application and everything. So our draft review deadline is April 3rd. If you guys are interested in reviewing a draft with us, definitely get your LOIs in early, and then schedule a draft review meeting with myself or Gigi through the grants at email address, and we'll kind of take it from there. The final application deadline is April 16th at 11:59 p.m. We'll send out those award notifications by June 30th, and all projects supported by grant funding awarded in this round will need to begin between July 1st and September 30th of this year, just so that you guys are all aware of those dates. We have a few other resources coming up pretty soon. On March 26th, we'll be hosting a webinar workshop on the topic of creating an outstanding grant proposal. We'll devote the first 45 minutes to the application narrative, which is probably going to be what takes up most of your time as you prep these applications for submission. And we'll devote the second, session, the second 45 minutes there to the application budget. Well, the budget doesn't take as much time to kind of like put together like the actual Excel spreadsheet. The budget session is one that we particularly recommend just because grant applications often run into problems, as people work on linking their budgets with their application narratives. I'd be super grateful if Gigi, if you could share out some links to registering for those webinars in the chat, maybe just so people have ready access to those too. Something to always keep on your radar is our resource roundup, which is a monthly email newsletter put together by members of the programs team here. That contains funding and professional development opportunities for public humanities professionals in the great state of New Jersey. It's a really, really great resource that is focused on, gathering and presenting other resources. It's just a super great one-stop shop for everything public humanities going on in New Jersey right now. If you need any additional assistance with preparing your application for submission, please feel free to reach out to both me and Gigi at the grants@njhumanities.org email address. We're going to get back to your requests within 24 hours if you send an email to that address there. If you need immediate assistance, you can also call us directly. Those are our direct lines. There on the slide there, and all our contact info is on the webpage too, so we're just always available for you guys. But what's really always available to you, like literally 24/7, day and night, is the grants overview page on our website. So we do want to encourage you to take advantage of the information and the resources that are collected there. Just so you know that that's always going to be available to you. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop the share and bring us all back together as a big group so that we can answer a few questions in the time that we have remaining. And I do want to, as a quick PS, let you guys know that grant application processes for this round are currently turned on in our system. They're visible to applicants, although you can't submit LOIs yet. So we're actually able to show you the site if you have any questions about the process itself. So does anyone have any questions?
Hey, Sylvester, there were several questions in the chat that I'd like to also say out loud,
Sure.
just in case anybody might have missed them in the chat. I'm going to just blow through these real quick, and then if there's any more questions, you can come back.
Sure.
I just put direct links to all of the programs, excuse me, that Sylvester mentioned into the chat. There's a lot more detail than anything we have time to go over today on the website. Are there examples of Humanities Lab funding, the projects that came through? Yes, you can see they're actually in the process of doing their projects right now, so there's not a lot of detail, but you can see the kinds of organizations that got involved, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. We're also having a Humanities Lab info session on March 13th, so that's another thing that you could keep an eye out for, which we will record and post as well. For sponsorships, there's actually a slightly different process for applying for a sponsorship, but the first part of it is actually sort of making a brief pitch to our sponsorship manager, Amy, about what you're looking to do, and then she gets back to you after that. And you can send any questions you have about sponsorships, or just whatever little brief description of the project that you're looking for sponsorship for, to sponsorships@njhumanities.org. I put that email in the chat. Are past grantees eligible to apply for Humanities Lab? Past grantees are eligible to apply for all of our programs, assuming you continue to meet the eligibility guidelines for each program. So yes, please do. Several of the Humanities Lab, in fact, it was about half and half. Half had worked with NJCH in the past, and about half were totally new to NJCH. Experimentation is really the key in Humanities Lab, a willingness to try out new things. Does what do we require for acknowledgement? There's detailed acknowledgement guidelines that come with each of your programs. You can see some of those on the website on the resources page. But generally speaking, logo, and there's some acknowledgement language. There's a little bit of variation depending on a program, especially if we've received special funding for that program. And it also depends a little bit how you're acknowledging, like how you acknowledge it on a website might be different than how you acknowledge on a flyer, might be different than how you acknowledge on an exhibit wall. So we work with you on that. Logo and a line is usually the thing. And so workshops on March 26th, the Creating an Outstanding Proposal workshop that's for people who are pursuing NJCH grants. It's a two-part workshop, the first part about narrative, the second part about budgets. We recommend both, especially if you're a new applicant, are virtual. And I'm going to put those links in the chat in a moment. They're also available on our events calendar and on the grants page. Couple more. The Assistive Humanities Lab projects. Felicia, I'm going to have to send it. There's no specific, that's the only URL that I gave, the njhumanities.org/humanities lab. I might need to get back to you on that one. And the link for the LOI, when it is open, is njhumanities.org/portal. Will take you directly to that link. Also, on the NJ Humanities website, on our grants pages, there's a link that says apply. Actually, on all of the programs, on almost all of the programs, there's a link that says apply. That'll take you directly to the portal. I think that's everything that came up.
I think so too. There are a few general questions. In terms of the site key, I'm not sure about that one personally. But I would definitely encourage you to use either the portal URL, Alana, or the apply button that Gigi was just talking about on the website there. In terms of our funding priorities, we can
I-
definitely expand on those too. But Ilana, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I clicked on that link for the portal itself. And then it took me, I logged in, I had created a login. And then it either gives me the option for the round 2 action grants, I can click on preview or I can click on send to Grant Hub. And when I go to send to Grant Hub, it says enter your Grant Hub site key.
Oh, I see. I feel like it's only giving you those 2 options because the round hasn't officially opened yet. Like
Okay, that's what I was
process
wondering.
yeah, the process is visible, but you aren't able to submit LOIs until March 1st. So,
Okay, so tomorrow there'll be a different button that then says enter the LOI or something like that.
exactly.
Start an
Yeah.
application.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Okay, just to be respectful of everyone's time, we are at 1 p.m. So if you don't have any additional questions, you can definitely feel free to, log off at this point or stick around, because I'm sure Gigi and I will be in the room for a few more minutes, just taking any additional questions that we didn't have time for. But otherwise, great to see you all, and thanks so much for coming to the workshop. We really appreciate it. Okay. So.
Arlette, and forgive me if I'm saying your name wrong.
Yes. Hi, Gigi. You said it right. Arlette.
Ah,
Nice
yes.
meeting you.
Hi, such a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm actually going to stop the recording right now.